the only reason that white people in the United States or anywhere we are in Europe, in Africa, in Australia, in Israel, wherever we are the colonizers. We are the colonizers, and we live off the expense of the assault, Europe's assault on Africa, the kidnapping of African human beings, the trafficking, all of these things that we hear today. This is where it came from. Hundreds of years of assaulting and stealing everything that African people and Africa as a continent had, and putting it into the hands of white people. And so this is why, as the chairman has said, the true class struggle, the true working class in the world is the African and colonized working class, not white people, because all white people, and you know this is true. You and I know this is true by just living our lives and seeing it. All white people sit on the pedestal on the backs of African and indigenous people. And, you know, the statistics are that even poor white people have an easier ability in a crisis to raise $3,000 in an emergency than middle-class African people do. Because we live in social wealth. We live with the wealth surrounding.
Now, we've always talked about how blacks have endured a lot of sufferings in the hands of whites, and this is something that is evident almost everywhere. History books have proven us right, and it is not something that can be hidden. If you look at the white power structures that have been created over the years, it is made to ensure that blacks remain subservient to whites. And this is something that people have fought from everywhere. We had the civil rights movement trying to ensure that blacks get access to justice and equal rights with whites. And while they achieved some success, this success has not really fully come to blacks, as we can see in almost everything that we look at in the world today. So in today's video, I came across a clip that is quite interesting. There was this lady who was talking about how American whites have been the colonizers everywhere. She was saying that America has benefited from the raiding and persecution of blacks, and that is what has made America what it is today. So without further ado, I want us to watch this video and get to understand who is responsible for black suffering and why they have ensured that this suffering is perpetual.
To African people here in Portland, Oregon. I want to start by saluting that amazing and powerful, really moving announcement. Thank you very much, Lucia. And I just want to salute Dakota, that you're a great MC, so I really appreciate it. And, you know, I want to salute all of you for coming out. I think this is the most important thing that we can be talking about, because everything that you look out and see as a problem, as a contradiction in this world, comes down to one essential question, and that is the reality that capitalism, the social system, and the world economy is built at the expense of African, indigenous, and colonized peoples around the world, and that oppressed and colonized people are struggling for their freedom and independence, and they are winning. So this is the question that no matter what you are thinking about, no matter what aspect of this, from war to the Trump administration to the everyday murders, police murders of young African people in this country, to mass imprisonment of Africans and indigenous people inside this country, to climate change, it all comes down to this question of parasitic capitalism, and we as white people have a responsibility to understand how we rectify our relationship to the people on the planet Earth. So I really want to salute all of you, because, you know, this isn't a feel-good conversation in a in an empty way. Ultimately, it is something that can transform our lives and put us in connection to the rest of the world in a positive way. And, you know, it's something that we can open this door that has been offered to us by the African liberation movement, by the struggle of African people for freedom and liberation. We're going to talk about that. But we have to understand the world and how it got to be the way it is. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And it's very powerful. It can change your life. It changed mine. The first time I heard Chairman Omali Yeshitela speak more than 40 years ago, as was said. So I want to begin by saluting Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who is the leader of the African People's Socialist Party. I want to be clear on that the African People's Socialist Party recognizes that all black people are African wherever they have been forcibly dispersed around the world, on the continent of Africa, in Brazil, throughout the Caribbean, throughout Europe now, as Africans are attempting to cross the Mediterranean, many being killed in the process to chase and pursue their stolen resources, and on the continent of Africa, of course, and here inside the borders of the United States. The Africans are one people around the world, and that the continent of Africa is their birthright, and all of the stolen wealth, the stolen labor, and the stolen land belongs to them. And this is the struggle that the African People's Socialist Party is very serious about making. And Chairman Omali Yeshitela has led that struggle. I'm going to talk a little bit more about him in a minute and what that means for us. But I believe that African people have a right to their land, to their stolen resources, and to the wealth that belongs to them, the wealth that we experience inside of white society and Europe and North America. So I salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela for creating the African People's Solidarity Committee, and it's been an honor to work under his leadership and the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party for all of these years. I want to salute Deputy Chair Ona Zanea Yeshitela, who some of us saw in the video, which, by the way, this powerful project in St. Louis called the Black Power Blueprint. There's so much more. You can go to blackpowerblueprint.org to see a lot of videos and a lot of pictures and more about this project. It's very, very powerful. It's not just something without a purpose. It's there to create dual and contending power economically and politically in the hands of the African working class, and it's centered in St. Louis. But again, the African People's Socialist Party exists all over the United States, as well as throughout Europe, especially in London, Paris, Sweden, Germany, and other places. And on the continent of Africa, there are members and units and organizations of the African People's Socialist Party in occupied Azania, South Africa. So even as we're here, they are there working and organizing in Azania, which has not had and won its liberation yet, and whose liberation is part and parcel of the liberation of the entire African continent, and also in Kenya and Ghana and other places. So the African People's Socialist Party is a worldwide organization, just so you know that. And the African People's Solidarity Committee is one front of it, and I'm going to talk about that. But Deputy Chair Ona Zanea Yeshitela is the leader, the coordinator of the Black Power Blueprint and of the economic front of the African People's Socialist Party. And we saw her in that video, and even though she's kind of dressed up there, she's actually been in her steel-toed boots for the last 18 months overseeing these projects. And a little bit later, we're going to see the after, because that was the before. So, there's so much of this that has been completed already, and it's very dynamic and very quick. So, it's something that's really growing and emerging in St. Louis, but throughout the African world. I also want to salute Comrade Jesse Neville, who is the chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and has just really coordinated these days of reparations. And I wanted to ask you, how many people here believe that reparations are owed to African people? All right, uhuru. So I really want to salute you. I think that's very powerful, and we're going to talk about that. And I want to salute Comrade Mads Ambrose, because for a lot of us in the white community, the reason you can raise your hand is because of the work of this comrade. And I really salute Mads, because Mads had no organizational support. They started reading about and hearing about, maybe online, about the Uhuru movement, about the Uhuru Solidarity movement, and Mads just made PowerPoints and went out there and started telling people about it and started organizing. And that is courageous, that is powerful, that is very brilliant. So I really want to salute you for taking this on. And I want to salute Britt and Israel and, and Dakota and Josh, the two Joshes, and, so many people who made this happen today. So this is very, very powerful. When we talk about the days of reparations to African people, this is where we as white people make a self-criticism to African people, which we have never done. And it is also a tribute to the leadership, to the historic courage and determination of African people who have been the moral compass of the entire world in the struggle and showing what the struggle for freedom and liberation is. And, we want to salute African people for that. And, it's really been powerful to be on this tour for the Days of Reparations, because as was said, this is the 8th city, or is it the 9th city? And we just had one in Australia. Of course, we weren't able to go this year, but next year we will. But the comrades there, again, are taking that on, had a great event. It was, they showed other events that we have put on as part of this tour, and, it's just building there in Australia, which is really the same thing as the United States. So we've been to Alabama, the heart of the southern plantation, where in the state of Alabama there were 300 lynchings or terrorist murders by white people of African people. We've been to Florida, we've been to St. Louis. St. Louis has a very particular relationship to the genocide of indigenous people and also to the enslavement of African people, and just the race riots of white people attacking African people in 1919 in East St. Louis, which was one of the most deadly attacks on African people that exists. So St. Louis had its particular relationship to the enslavement and the colonialism. We've been to New York, where, just in as such a metaphor, but in reality, that there are under the high-rise buildings of Wall Street is a cemetery, is a burial ground of enslaved Africans, hundreds of bodies there. And it was the struggle of African people in New York that forced the city not to build another building there. They found that when they tore down a building at a certain point. So, that just tells the story of the United States. We were in Boston, which was the center of the owners of slave ships in Boston, in the state of Massachusetts. And, so every place we've gone, there's a particular thing, there's a particular relationship that white people have had to the system. But here in Oregon, I was just reading about it, it's like the haven for white power. That's what it was created to be. And I just was Googling things, and I saw that in 1840, was it, that all Africans were evicted from this state, including enslaved African people, which shows that, of course, slavery was legal here. But the point is that this is white land. This is what it was built as. So that is really powerful, to have Comrade Mads and to have the Uhuru Solidarity Movement building here, which is still seen today as a haven for white power. So this is challenging it, and this is, you know, bringing it to the forward side of history. So I salute you for doing that. And, you know, again, we have to look at the fact that we are the subjects of history, that we tell the story, we are the narrative, we give the narrative, we extrapolate out from the conditions we experience to the rest of the world. We put it in their mouths, we describe their conditions based on ours, and that we live in a very, very, very different parallel universe to the conditions of not only oppressed and colonized peoples around the world, but oppressed and colonized peoples inside the borders of the United States. So I want to talk about that, because the reason that Chairman Omali Yeshitela is so significant and important is not because he has been struggling for more than 50 years nonstop for the liberation of African people, but because he is today still fighting, and because the African liberation movement of the 1960s was defeated. It was defeated by COINTELPRO, by the FBI, the CIA, all these forces who assassinated the leaders like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Fred Hampton. It crushed this movement, it slandered it, and as the chairman has shown, that it came in at the end of that with basically to salt the earth by wiping out all of the colonial economy that existed in African communities all over this country, and imposed deadly drugs like heroin and crack cocaine into the African community. We all know the US government did that. That's been proven and shown in very many different documentaries and the Iran-Contra hearings and many other things. So that's recorded fact. And use that to criminalize what had been known to the whole world as the moral high ground of the African liberation movement, to vilify and criminalize the African working class, and to literally pump drugs in and create a drug economy so there was no other way for people to make a living whatsoever. And then began this massive prison building, 3 strikes you're out, and other designer laws specifically to attack the African community, so that we have basically marijuana legal. But did you see, like in Colorado or California, are they releasing all the Africans who are in prison for that? No, they're not. So we have this largest prison population in the entire world that is 2.3 million people. Half of them are African. Another quarter of them are Mexican and indigenous. In this country has a prison population larger than China, which has over 1 billion people in population. So it's this country where the gulag is, this country where there are concentration camps where Africans are sent, and there's no outcry about that. It's just an accepted reality in the white community. Africans going to prison for things that literally white people can just say, can go down to the police station and say, can you help me, I'm a drug addict, and you don't go to prison for that. You just go to recovery, you go to some kind of program, and Africans go to prison, 3 strikes you're out, often for life. This country has the largest children's prison population of any place in the world. And there are children, thousands of children in this country, mostly African, who are in prison for 30 years to life for colonialism, for the conditions that they face. This is colonialism inside the borders of the United States. So the chairman had an important task. He had an important work to do, because the African Revolution in the 1960s was defeated, and the Marcus Garvey movement of the 1920s which galvanized 11 million African people around the world on the slogan, Africa for Africans, those at home and those abroad, was also defeated by the US government and wiped out of history books. So the chairman had to solve the problems of the African Revolution. He had to understand what happened, because the next time around that he was determined that African people are going to win. They're going to win. So he can solve the problems and find out, how do you win? How do you defeat the greatest imperial power on this planet Earth? And it can be done. And by the way, Africans in Haiti did it when they defeated Napoleon's army in 1804 and won liberation for Haiti. And we don't have time to talk about that, but that is an amazing, amazing history. So the African People's Socialist Party and the chairman is very serious. They're going to liberate Africa. They're going to liberate African people. They're going to get their resources back, and they're going to win. And they're going to take everybody with them that wants to go, including us, because this is the future. And this very planet cannot live under the system of capitalism anymore. It's destroyed hundreds of millions of people. It's wiped out whole civilizations, and it's practically wiped out the ability of the earth itself to be a habitat for human beings. And nobody's going to solve that problem that's part of the problem. Only when African and indigenous people are free will we see the solution to those problems, and that's going to be a world without oppression, a world of liberation, a world of the flowering of the human spirit under the leadership of the African working class. That's the world that I want to live in, and I think if you're here tonight, you want to live in. You know, you're sick of this system. You're sick of it, and we have a way to go forward if we take this up, because this system, parasitic capitalism, is dying, and the majority of humanity has a huge interest in bringing it down, and that's what's happening. That's what's happening. So it's very powerful. So we're going to see a world of no oppression, and that is going to be through the freedom and liberation of Africa. And we're going to see what true socialism is. When African people and African workers have control over the means of production for the people, for the interests of the people. So the chairman had to solve some problems of the revolution, left unsolved by the previous period, by the 1960s. And some of these are very, very important. One of them is the question, the understanding that capitalism is parasitic. Capitalism parasitic, what does that mean? That means that capitalism was born by Europe leaving its shores and beginning in the 1400s with an assault on Africa. So Europe went out as an imperialist power and began bringing in gold, but most importantly, bringing in African human beings, turning African people into commodities, items for sale. This whole human trafficking. This is what started the stock market of Amsterdam, the stock market of London, the stock market of New York. This is what created the wealth, because Europe was poor, it was oppressed, it was under feudalism, it had nothing. This is how Europe got to be the wealthiest country and power on the planet Earth. And this is how the white world got power. So it was built on the assault on African people, which it has not recovered from today. It is built on the genocide of the indigenous people and the theft of the land, and on the colonial terror and domination by Europe of the majority of humankind. The majority of everybody around the world lives under the colonial, the political and economic domination of the United States now, and of capitalism. This is how it was born. And that's really important that we understand it, because if we don't, then we think that there was a kinder, gentler capitalism in the past. You know, that, oh, well, we just go back to how it used to be. Well, no, how it used to be was wholesale genocide, was wholesale rape, plunder, murder, enslavement, turning human beings into commodities. This is how it was born. So that is a really, really important point. And that the chairman also says that the class struggle in the whole world is located in the colonial contradiction. What does that mean? That means that the true working class of the world, the one that can successfully fight the ruling class and win and take power, is the African working class and the colonized working class, not white people, not white workers. This is a really important thing that we have to understand, because the chairman says that all white people sit on the pedestal of the oppression of African people and the genocide and colonialism. All of us do. This is really key, because that means that there's no way that the solution is for white workers and black workers to hold hands and go forward. Because white workers have always used African workers to climb up the ladder of success and to unite with our own ruling class against African people. We're the ones that carried out the most incredible violence, these lynchings, this terror, and so many other things against African indigenous people. We did it, not the state. Before there was the state, we were the state. We did it. We carried it out. We have to take responsibility for that. That's part of what reparations is about in a human way. We have to take responsibility for the terror that we carried out. It's just part of everyday life. As part of these festivals where 10,000 white people would come to burn or murder and kill African people. They had bands playing, they had souvenirs, and you've seen the pictures where they pose little white girls in front of the bodies, and white girls with a big bow in the hair. You know, this is our legacy. This is what we have to take responsibility for, and it's incredibly important, because we don't say, oh, well, we're sorry, can't we just all get along now? No, we can't. No, we can't. We have to go through this process, and we have to understand and take responsibility for the position that we've been in. And, you know, I read that African people have DNA in their bodies transferred from generation to generation. This is a scientific thing, that African people have the trauma passed down from generation to generation. And, you know, I just wonder if we as white people have the violence DNA. Because look at mass shootings, you know, every day. Do we have the violence DNA? Yeah, I think so. And we see all of this because, you know, we see what's happening almost every single day, another mass murder. Well, this is how this country, this is how this system was formed. We can't take it out of that context. This is how it was formed. So it's white people carrying out what we have always done. So there's also the understanding that there is colonialism inside the United States. It's not enough to say that, it's not even true to say that the problem is racism, because the struggle of African people is for political power to have a state that protects African people from anybody who has a racist idea in their head. And I believe in that. Of course that has to be. All human beings fight for that. African people will have power. Another demonstration is meaningless. It must end with power in the hands of African people that protects the people and enables their own economy to develop in their own interests. So I think that is really powerful. So the African People's Solidarity Committee is part of the strategy and part of of these problems and issues that the chairman has solved. And in 1976, they created this African People's Solidarity Committee. I happened to be there for whatever twist of fate. I was there, and I couldn't walk away from it because once these ideas were in my head, I wanted to be part of this. How could I not see it? How could I not see it? But the strategy of the African People's Solidarity Committee is really key. And we exist not as just, oh, well, let's have a solidarity committee, but the existence of APSC and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement enables the African Revolution to extend into the heart of imperialism and into the heart of the white population. It's a very brilliant strategy. And it's based on reparations, returning the stolen resources to African people, to the African Revolution, by the way. It's not about, oh, going into a bar and buying a drink for an African person. This has nothing to do with that. This is about the wealth that we have at the expense of African people, which is basically all the wealth of this planet, has to go back to them. It has to go back to them in the African Revolution, because that is the economic basis that belongs to them. And that it's an understanding that the chairman has that the price of the stolen labor, the stolen resources, and the stolen land of African and indigenous people has never been factored in. It has never been paid. It has been stolen. It has been stolen. And that it has to be. This is what's happening. This is the reckoning. This is saying that this is our wealth and it must go back to them. And, you know, so they created an organization to be able to do that. And that's what we do. We go into the white community to win reparations, not just as an idea, but as an actual turning of resources back over to the African population because it is theirs. And that it enables the party to build economic bases, to build dual and contending power, and to be surrounded by a rear base of support from the white community that becomes a buffer between what U.S. imperialism can do to African people. You know, we can be there, and also a supply line returning the stolen resources to the African Revolution. It's very, very brilliant. But I also want to say really quickly that it is more than that, because, you know, it's a strategy, it's brilliant, it enables the African Revolution to win. It lets us rip from, you know, the grasp of U.S. imperialism, this unity that most of us have with our own ruling class and with white power. It says, come on over to the forward side of history, and it makes it easier, ultimately, for the African Revolution to win, and it weakens and deepens the crisis of imperialism. But it's also a very amazing thing that happens to us, because for the first time in history, we're able to jump off this pedestal that we've been on at the expense of everybody else. And we're able to join humanity and find our own humanity for the first time in history. And we have a job to do. We have a specific job to do to win all these other white people and to go there, to stand on the side of the struggle for the liberation of African people and all oppressed and colonized peoples of the world. And I just want to say that they call it the deaths of despair because a lot of white people are dying and killing ourselves, you know, and I feel like we can be here, you know, let's say, and look at beautiful Mount Hood and look at this beautiful land here, and then one day, you know, we can see what's happening in the world, and we can look at that Mount Hood and it turns red with the blood of people on the planet Earth, and it's like a horror movie, and people's hands are sticking out of the ground saying this is our land. And, you know, and that everything becomes, you know, we can't separate the reality of, you know, of the oppression of African people and the indigenous people, you know, with what we see. and we begin to see the world as it really is. And instead of killing ourselves through alcohol, killing ourselves through drugs, or just plain committing suicide, we can commit national suicide and stand on the side of the African liberation movement that is about freedom and liberation for all humanity, an end to this vicious, filthy, white power system, and the ability for us as human beings to recognize and be part of humanity for the first time in history. So I want to thank everybody for coming out today. This is going to be a very powerful event, and I want to end by saying unity through reparations.
So that speaker was Penny Hess, who is the chair of African People's Solidarity Committee. And she frames her statement that Americans are the colonizers within the lens of African internationalism, a political theory developed by the African People's Socialists Party. By this, she means that the United States, built on a settler colonialism, continues to perpetuate a system of oppression rooted in its historical and ongoing dispositions of indigenous peoples and exploitation of African and other colonized populations. Her perspective challenges the mainstream narrative of American identity, arguing that the nation's foundations rest on violence, theft, and systemic inequality, which she sees as defining the American experience. She points to the genocide of Native Americans and the enslavement of Africans as the original sins of the United States, acts that established a settler colonial state where wealth and power were consolidated through stolen land and labor. She argues that this colonial framework didn't end with independence or abolition, but evolved into modern systems of racial and economic oppression, such as mass incarceration, police violence, and economic disparities, which disproportionately harm Black and indigenous communities. For Hess, American, particularly white Americans, are complicit in this legacy, as they benefit from a society structure to maintain these inequalities, whether consciously or not. Her statement also implies a call to action. By labeling Americans as colonizers, she argues white people to reject the colonizers' worldview and align with anti-colonial struggles, particularly African liberation movements. This involves acknowledging historical wrongs, supporting reparations, and working under the leadership of colonized people to dismantle oppressive systems. Hess sees this solidarity as a way for white Americans to break from the colonizer identity and contribute to a world where power is redistributed equitably. Critics might argue that her generalization oversimplifies American identity, ignoring the diversity of experiences or the contributions of non-white Americans who have fought against oppression. Yet Hess' rhetoric is deliberately provocative, aiming to disrupt complacency and highlight the structural nature of colonialism embedded in American institutions. For her, the colonizer label isn't just historical, it's a present reality reflected in ongoing global imperialism and domestic policies that marginalize Black and indigenous voices. Ultimately, Hess' statement is a radical critique, demanding Americans confront their nation's colonial roots and their role in perpetuating or dismantling them. That is it from us today. I think if you listen to the speech by Hess, and if you also listen to the commentary that I've just highlighted there, you are able to see why she refers to Americans as the colonizers, as the people who have benefited from mass incarceration of Blacks and even mass disenfranchisement of minority communities. Tell me down in the comment section what you think about this. And if you're watching us for the first time, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.